It began as an ordinary Tuesday. Clear skies, quiet streets, a morning like any other. But within minutes, the world changed forever. On September 11th, 2001, the unimaginable happened. 4 planes turned into weapons, 2 towers became infernos, and the very idea of safety vanished in smoke and ash. This is not just a story about destruction. It's a story about those first 72 hours, the fear, the confusion, the courage, and the choices that reshaped the 21st century. Hour zero, a clear blue morning, September 11th, 2001, began like any other Tuesday in New York City. The skies were a flawless blue. Commuters poured into Manhattan, children filed into classrooms, and millions turned on the news without knowing that within minutes, history would change forever. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. At first, many thought it was a tragic accident. But when United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower at 9:03 a.m., the truth became undeniable. America was under attack. The images, flames billowing out of skyscrapers, papers fluttering across the city like confetti, terrified people fleeing through the streets, spread across the globe instantly. Within minutes, the United States faced a crisis unlike anything in living memory. The hour 1 to 3, chaos in the skies. By 9:37 a.m., a third plane, American Airlines Flight 77, crashed into the Pentagon, the heart of America's military command. Panic spread nationwide. Fighter jets were scrambled. Airports went on lockdown. For the first time in history, the entire U.S. airspace was shut down. At 10:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 93 crashed into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, after passengers fought back against the hijackers. Its target, likely the White House or U.S. Capitol, was never reached, but the sacrifice of those on board became a defining act of courage. The Twin Towers, symbols of American power and ambition, could not withstand the inferno. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapsed. At 10:28 a.m., the North Tower followed. Manhattan was plunged into dust and darkness as first responders and survivors stumbled through choking air, searching for safety and for each other. The hour 4 to 12, rescue and resolve. In the immediate aftermath, New York became a war zone. Firefighters, police officers, and volunteers rushed toward the wreckage, digging with their bare hands in a desperate attempt to find survivors. Hospitals filled with the injured, while blood donation centers saw lines wrapping around blocks. President George W. Bush, initially in Florida, was shuttled between Air Force bases before addressing the nation from the White House that evening. His words were clear. "We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them." Across the country, fear mixed with unity. People clutched American flags, strangers embraced in the streets, cell towers jammed with millions of calls as families checked on loved ones. Hour 12 to 24, the world watches. By nightfall, Lower Manhattan was unrecognizable. Fires raged in the debris. Thousands were missing. The skyline, once dominated by the Twin Towers, was gone. Around the world, leaders expressed solidarity with America. NATO declared that the attack on the United States would be considered an attack on all member nations, invoking Article 5 for the first time in history. For Americans, September 11th did not end with sleep. The glow of fires, the endless sirens, and the fear of another strike kept the nation awake. The first 24 hours marked the end of an era. The illusion of safety shattered, replaced by grief, anger, and questions that would define a generation. Hour 24 to 30, the morning after September 12th, 2001. Dawn broke over New York City, but the air was still thick with smoke, ash, and the acrid smell of burning steel. Lower Manhattan looked like a battlefield. Firefighters and rescue workers, covered in dust, continued their desperate search for survivors. Every so often, cheers would erupt when someone was pulled alive from the rubble. But these moments were rare. Families clung to hope, posting photos of missing loved ones on walls, subway stations, and community boards. Hospitals prepared for mass casualties that never came because so few survived the collapse of the towers. Across the country, candlelight vigils were held. Churches, mosques, and synagogues opened their doors. The nation, stunned by grief, sought comfort in one another. Hour 30 to 36, a nation mobilizes. Washington, D.C. was now a fortress. Military personnel patrolled the streets while anti-aircraft weapons were positioned near key government buildings. For the first time, Americans were adjusting to the sight of armed soldiers guarding their own cities. President George W. Bush met with his national security team, vowing a decisive response. Intelligence agencies scrambled to confirm what had already become clear. The attacks were carried out by Al-Qaeda, a terrorist network led by Osama bin Laden. In New York, Mayor Rudy Giuliani and Governor George Pataki worked with federal officials to coordinate emergency response. The pile, as Ground Zero was called, became the center of the recovery effort. Smoke continued to rise as cranes and bulldozers began the grim work of clearing debris. Hour 36 to 42, global shock waves. The world's response grew louder. From London to Tokyo, Paris to Sydney, candlelight vigils honored the victims. In Tehran, Iran, thousands of people held spontaneous gatherings to express sympathy with Americans, an image that surprised much of the world. NATO leaders reaffirmed their commitment under Article 5, pledging support for the United States. World markets trembled, and Wall Street remained closed, marking its longest shutdown since the Great Depression. Airlines worldwide tightened security, while governments debated how to prevent a similar attack. In New York, the rescue mission shifted slowly into recovery. Emergency workers began to understand the scale of the tragedy. Nearly 3,000 lives lost. The piles of debris were not just steel and concrete, they were graves. Hour 42 to 48. Defiance amid despair. On the evening of September 12th, vigils lit up every corner of the nation. From the steps of the U.S. Capitol to small town squares, candles flickered against the night. Americans sang the national anthem, prayed and mourned together. At Yankee Stadium, a spontaneous rendition of God Bless America echoed, signaling how even sports arenas became places of collective grief. The words, "United We Stand," appeared on banners, bumper stickers, and storefronts across the country. In Washington, leaders of both political parties presented a united front. There was no debate over whether America would respond, only how. Behind closed doors, military planners drafted the first outlines of what would soon become the War on Terror. The first 48 hours after the attacks were not only about shock and sorrow, they were about a nation finding its footing. The images of smoke and ruin were seared into memory, but so too was the determination to endure. Hour 48 to 54, the world on alert. September 13th, 2001. The fires at Ground Zero still burned, filling the sky with a toxic haze. First responders worked without rest, digging through the rubble with little more than hope to guide them. Rescue dogs searched for survivors, but most found silence. Across the U.S., airports remained closed. For the first time in living memory, skies over America were nearly empty. No commercial flights, no private planes, only the occasional roar of military jets. The silence was eerie, a reminder that normal life had stopped. At the United Nations, world leaders delivered speeches of solidarity. Even longtime adversaries expressed sympathy. For a brief moment, the world was united in grief and outrage. Hour 54 to 60, Homeland Security takes shape. In Washington, government officials began drafting emergency legislation to tighten security and intelligence coordination. This would later become the foundation of the Department of Homeland Security and the USA Patriot Act. The FBI and CIA raced to uncover how the hijackers had entered the country, tracing flight schools, visas, and financial networks. Names like Mohammed Atta and Osama bin Laden were now on every news broadcast. Americans demanded answers, but they also demanded action. Polls showed overwhelming support for a decisive military response. The shock of the attacks had given way to a new national mood. Resolve. Hour 60 to 66, the Morning Nation. Memorial services filled churches, synagogues, and mosques across the country. In New York, the streets near Ground Zero became both a rescue site and a place of mourning. Families posted photographs of loved ones on fences, walls, and lampposts. The posters formed a heartbreaking mosaic of missing fathers, mothers, children, and friends. On Capitol Hill, members of Congress gathered on the steps of the building to sing "God Bless America." For a divided political climate, the unity was extraordinary. In those moments, the usual partisanship was replaced by a shared determination to stand together. Hour 66 to 72, a new era, begins by the third day. The full scale of the tragedy was clear. Thousands dead, the towers reduced to smoldering ruins, and the Pentagon scarred but still standing. The U.S. economy reeled, but Wall Street prepared to reopen. Markets around the world were volatile, bracing for uncertainty. President George W. Bush gathered his cabinet and national security team at Camp David to map out the next steps. The consensus was forming. The attacks could not go unanswered. Plans for military operations in Afghanistan began to take shape. Around the world, people wondered what would come next. For Americans, the first 72 hours after 9/11 were not just about mourning what was lost. They were about crossing a threshold. The age of peace and security at home was gone. The age of terrorism, preemptive wars, and heightened fear had begun. Beyond the first 72 hours, what happened after those 3 days would shape the world for decades. In the weeks following 9/11, the United States launched Operation Enduring Freedom on October 7, 2001, beginning the invasion of Afghanistan. The Taliban regime, accused of sheltering Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda, was toppled within weeks. But the war that began as a swift retaliation turned into America's longest conflict. The war in Afghanistan lasted nearly 20 years, from 2001 until the withdrawal of U.S. troops in August 2021. It claimed the lives of over 170,000 people, including soldiers, civilians, and aid workers, and cost the U.S. trillions of dollars. In 2003, the U.S. expanded its war on terror into Iraq, toppling Saddam Hussein under claims of weapons of mass destruction, claims that proved false but reshaped the Middle East. At home, security and surveillance transformed daily life. From TSA screenings at airports to the Patriot Act, the balance between freedom and safety was forever altered. In 2011, nearly 10 years after the attacks, U.S. forces killed Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, bringing a symbolic closure for many Americans. The legacy of 9/11 is still with us. It redrew alliances, reshaped military doctrines, and redefined the idea of safety in the modern world. The first 72 hours after the attacks captured the world's shock, grief, and unity. But what followed was a war that lasted 2 decades, a cycle of conflict and consequence that continues to echo through global politics today.